Put down here.
Thank you for joining us. My name is Bethany McCorkle. I'm the Communication Director for Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost. We are trying to bring the information as quickly as possible. Grand jury for Summit County just concluded. So we will have a press conference. The AG will share information on the results. We also have the two prosecutors who presented the case to grand jury joining us remotely as well.
Recording in progress.
The AG will do remarks and let the prosecutors speak, and then we'll kick it back to the AG for Q&A. Please let us know if you have any questions in the chat, and we will go through them in the order we've received them. We do have a press release that will be sent out as well afterwards. So at this time, I'm going to let Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost come up and give remarks. Thank you.
Good afternoon. We're here to talk about the death of Jayland Walker. My office's work and the decision of the grand jury is driven by the law as it is, not as it might be. The grand jury in this case served as a voice of the community, and my office made a point of neutrally presenting all the evidence to that grand jury. And there was a great deal of evidence presented so that the grand jury could make a well-informed decision based on all the facts. While many grand jury cases take only minutes, this case took more than a week because of the large amount of evidence that was presented. It's important to note at the beginning that the job of our office was to investigate the events at the invitation of the Akron Police Department, and then at the invitation of the Summit County Prosecuting Attorney to present that case to the grand jury. The grand jury was instructed about the law by the judge that oversees it, not as is customary by the prosecutors, to avoid any question about the accuracy of the legal instructions. Here is a shorthand version of what transpired. In June last year, Mr. Walker took at least one shot from his vehicle at the police, led them on a chase, and exited from his vehicle in a ski mask, ignoring multiple commands by officers to show his hands and to stop. As you will hear in more detail from the prosecutors who presented the evidence to the grand jury, a foot pursuit ensued, which officers, still having every reason to believe that Mr. Walker was armed, attempted to use non-lethal tasers to subdue him. Mr. Walker then reached for his waistband in what several officers described as a cross-draw motion planted his foot, and turned toward the officers while raising his hand. Only then did the officers fire, believing Mr. Walker was firing again at them. Although the officers did not know it at the time, Mr. Walker had left his recently purchased gun in his car. However, there is no doubt that he did, in fact, shoot at police officers. Shell casing from that shot was recovered on the entrance ramp to State Route 8, and ballistics traced that back and matched it to the weapon in Mr. Walker's vehicle. The law allows officers to use deadly force to defend themselves or others against a deadly threat. Now, the Summit County grand jury, people who live there in the community, spent more than a week reviewing the BCI investigation. The grand jury concluded that the officers were legally justified in their use of force. The grand jury just a little while ago issued what is called a no bill, meaning that there will be no state criminal action, no charges at the state level. That does not resolve any potential civil action that might be brought for wrongful death. Now, legal justification does not change the terrible permanent
Jordan, are you good to push?
Jayland Walker's death. I grieve the loss of this promising young life, although I recognize that no words of mine can offer much comfort to his family. I do hope they will find some comfort in this. Ohio is unified today in mourning the loss of their son and family member. The body camera footage in this case is especially grievous to watch. Most officer-involved shootings involve an officer or perhaps an officer and a partner. It is unusual, although hardly unprecedented, to have this many officers firing their weapon at the same time at a single subject. The sheer number of shots is one of the things that makes the video so hard to watch. Multiple officers, each making an independent judgment about a threat and acting independently to neutralize that threat, creates a dynamic that amplifies the use of force exponentially. That being said, it is critical to remember that Mr. Walker had fired on the police and that he shot first. There is no more serious matter than when the government takes the life of a citizen. Several years ago, I took the first ever step of publishing our investigative files on every use of deadly force by the police that we investigate. Later today, the files in this case will also be published on our website for everyone to see. I'm proud of the work of our investigators. As you will see, their work was extensive and thorough. The reason I decided to begin publishing all of the evidence that our investigators find was to help each community that has a tragedy like this to understand what actually happened and to know that the investigation was thorough, expert, and independent, to know the truth. Now, one of our career prosecutors who presented this case to the grand jury will walk you through the evidence in more detail. Anthony Pearson is a career prosecutor with experience in the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office, as well as being a senior assistant attorney general here in our special prosecutions unit. I dare say that he has handled more of these kinds of cases than anyone in Ohio, and he contributed to the book we published on officer-involved critical incidents. When he is done with more detailed summary, I will return and we both will answer questions to the best of our ability. Thank you. Anthony?
Facts of this case, but as also the Attorney General stated, the complete investigation will be up on our website. So obviously, I'm not going to go into all of the details here. But we have the death of Jayland Walker happened on June 27th, 2022. Akron police officers observed a 2005 Buick Century. A license plate light was out on that vehicle. It was around 12:22 a.m. The CAD system noted, which is an officer tracking system, noted that there was a pursuit of this vehicle the night before. They decided to not conduct a traffic stop at that particular time. Officers returned back to North Hayward and Talmadge Avenue. Vehicle returns 8 minutes later. At that point in time, the Akron police officers attempted to do a traffic stop. The vehicle flees, fires at least one shot from the vehicle. Pursuit ends on Wilbeth Road. A total of 94 shots were fired by 8 different Akron police officers. Jayland Walker was shot in excess of 45 times. So a summary of the process, interviews and investigations conducted over 100 recorded interviews, including recorded interviews of the 8 officers who discharged their weapons, recorded interviews of 47 officers who were involved in the incident at the scene or otherwise deemed to potentially have relevant information, recorded interviews of possible witnesses, recorded interviews of family members, friends, and associates of Mr. Walker, recorded interviews of other individuals who provided information both relevant and irrelevant to the investigation. Search warrants and subpoenas. Investigation subpoenas were obtained and served. A total of 6 search warrants and 4 subpoenas related to this investigation included search warrant of Mr. Walker's 2005 Buick registered to him, search warrant of his recovered cell phone, search warrant for Uber Eats employment records pertaining to Mr. Walker, search warrant for DoorDash employment records pertaining to Mr. Walker, search warrant for Google records pertaining to Mr. Walker, search warrants for cell phones, and search warrants for financial records and phone records. Scene processing. Processing of the scene for potential evidence included photographing, searching, documenting, and collecting. 3D scans, models of the incident area, drone footage of the scene, processing of involved vehicles for potential evidence. The BCI agents collected over 150 items of evidence from the scene and vehicle. The BCI agents also collect body-worn cameras and dash cameras related to the incident. 8 body-worn camera footage clips for the involved officers. Akron Police Department has a policy and procedures where each Akron police officer is equipped with a body-worn camera. So not only were we able to get the 8 cameras worn by the officers involved in the shooting, we're also able to obtain the 4 body-worn camera footage clips from other officers responding after the shooting had occurred. 38 body-worn camera footage clips from other responding officers. 1 body-worn camera footage clip and 1 dash cam camera footage clip from a Cuyahoga Falls officer that captured Jayland Walker discharging a firearm from his vehicle. There were additionally 25 Ohio Department of Transportation traffic camera clips, run ring doorbell video clips, 6 surveillance camera clips for the Bridgestone Center for Research and Technology, Range USA Akron surveillance camera video from June 27th, 2022, when Mr. Walker was taken to the gun range there, and Range USA Akron surveillance camera footage from June 20th of 2022 that shows Jayland buying the firearm that was recovered from his vehicle after the shooting. A little bit of history on Mr. Walker. He was a 25-year-old male with no criminal history. He worked as a delivery driver for Uber Eats and DoorDash, and prior to that, he worked for Amazon. So directing your attention to June 20th, 2022, we see Mr. Walker at Range USA at the firing range with a friend of his. He meets this friend that he had known for a long time. They go to the gun range and they meet up, and they shoot guns. It is described in detail to the BCI agents afterward during their investigation that Mr. Walker had very little to no familiarity with firearms, and this was essentially his first time firing a gun. This is the receipt from the transaction that shows Mr. Walker there on June 7th, 2022. Almost 2 weeks later, Mr. Walker is at Range USA. He is there and he purchases a handgun. This is surveillance video that documents his purchase of the handgun. We have the receipt from that transaction that also included ammunition, and we have his credit card receipt detailing the purchase of that weapon. On June 26, 2022, at 2:30 in the morning, New Franklin pursuit. That is where Officer Robert Wagner was sitting stationary on Akron, uniforms 4410 Manchester Road. He noticed a vehicle, the license plate rear light was out, and that was on a Buick Century 2005 with the accompanying license plate number. He took note of that vehicle, he entered it into the system, and he began to pursue that vehicle. That pursuit became a little bit too dangerous for the type of violation that the officer was pursuing. As a result, that pursuit was called off. And this is just a more detailed analysis of where that pursuit began, where it ended. This also identifies where Mr. Walker's home was located at that time. Now, during the pursuit, Mr. Walker's cell phone was at his residence. Cell phone records indicate that cell phone was at his residence. There's no indication that someone else was driving his vehicle. No text messages, phone calls, witness interviews, or anything like that indicate that someone other than Mr. Walker was driving that vehicle. That driver of that vehicle gets entered into the system as a white male driver. During the interview, obviously, this was something important that the investigators wanted to follow up upon. They interviewed the sergeant who entered this information. He was essentially at the tail end of that pursuit. He was not behind. I believe he was at the tail end of that pursuit on a side street, and he saw the vehicle, Jayland Walker's vehicle, pass by. And during the interview, he stated, and from what I saw, the guy was wearing a black hoodie. He had his hood up, so really the only thing I could see was his hands. So I assumed, I didn't assume, I thought I saw his hands white, but I could have been the steering wheel because I don't really know. But again, all indications are that that person was Mr. Walker. This is a timeline of the pursuit. Essentially, the pursuit that night started on, again, June 27th. Mr. Walker was driving around in the early hours, and he is driving around the city, and his cell phone is pinging off of various cell phone towers. There's no indication that he is actually going anywhere in particular, but he is just driving in the area. He's driving in the same area where he was pulled over the night before. And this is an information from Officer Heatwall. Officer Heatwall was a Cuyahoga Falls officer. He was stationed at an intersection when this pursuit occurred by Akron PD that was initiated because, again, he had a tail light that was out, a license plate light that was out, Mr. Walker did. And this officer, Heatwall, saw this pursuit occurring, and he initially followed the vehicles because what he saw was one Akron police officer following this vehicle, and he decided to help out. It is his camera that picks up the gunshot. As you can see, Mr. Walker's Buick and the Akron police cruiser following it. It's this officer's dash cam that picks up the best, probably the best vantage point to show Mr. Walker firing the round from that vehicle. So going into the pursuit a bit, this is when the pursuit started. This is essentially a Google Maps outline of the officer pursuit, ending at the top of the screen where Mr. Walker's vehicle ultimately stopped. So I'm going to show at this point the shooting in real time for one particular officer's body worn camera. It was one officer who was employed by Akron Police Department at the time.
It's playing.
It's my understanding that the video is not projecting. I will go through some of the stills. As you know, the videos, all of the officer body cam videos will be released on our website later this evening. But I will go through the stills that depict what those videos show. So from one particular officer's body worn camera, this is later in the chase. So Mr. Walker gets on the highway. He fires a shot at the officers. The officers call a signal 21. That is the highest response signal for Akron Police Department. That indicates that something very bad is going on, and an officer is being shot at. Everyone respond. So everyone who is not, all officers who are not immediately involved in something, they need to respond, and that is what happens here. So after the shot is fired, they continue to pursue Mr. Walker, and ultimately, they end up in the area where the shooting occurs. But this still here predicts, it depicts as Mr. Walker's car is stopping and slowing down. He is attempting to get out of the driver's side of the vehicle. It's kind of hard to tell here, but if you look closely, Mr. Walker does have the ski mask on. His eyes are visible. In the next slide, you see a vehicle, and that is a police vehicle that has come up on the left-hand side of Mr. Walker's vehicle. And Mr. Walker at this time is attempting to get out of the passenger side. During the pursuit, another police cruiser, came very close, if not made contact to the driver door as Mr. Walker was looking like he could exit the driver door. So he gets out of the passenger side. Mr. Walker, as you can see again, has a ski mask on. His hands are not visible. Officer shouting multiple commands at him to get out of the vehicle, to stop, don't flee, put his hands up. Mr. Walker ignores all of those commands and continues to flee. This is another angle from another officer camera that shows Mr. Walker exiting the vehicle. Again, as the Attorney General stated during the introduction, officers at this point in time do not know where the gun is. All that they know at this time of the chase is that they have been shot at. They have followed Mr. Walker. He is bailed out of the vehicle with the ski mask on. They are not aware of whether the gun is on his person or somewhere else. You can kind of see both hands here, but we have to remember that oftentimes cameras pick up things different than what the human eye picks up. Again, another angle from another officer who was involved shows Mr. Walker exiting the vehicle and fleeing from them. Mr. Walker continues to run. He is, at least on one occasion prior to the shooting, he makes a full 360 turn at the officers. He is, I believe this is part of the turn where he turns, faces the officers as he's running. Throughout this encounter and throughout the chase, they are directing him to show them his hands, but Mr. Walker continues to reach for his waistband and possibly into pockets of the garments that he's wearing. These are various videos of Mr. Walker continuing to run and flee from police officers. This slide shows that as Mr. Walker was fleeing, more than one officer attempted to use non-lethal force to stop Mr. Walker from fleeing. They used tasers, and you can see here the yellow item at the top of the screen is a taser. And you can see there's a line through the center, which is the wire that failed to connect to Mr. Walker after the taser was deployed. Again, in this slide, you see officers attempting to tase Mr. Walker. You see a taser on the left hand of, on the left part of the screen. This is another taser attempt by another officer. You see the yellow taser being fired at Mr. Walker as he's running. Mr. Walker continues to run. He goes from a running motion where you can see his elbows high as he's running from them. And you can see that here in this slide. So he goes from a running motion to what seems or can be described as a reaching motion. So he goes from running with his elbows high to now reaching either maybe to a jacket pocket or to his pants area, waistband area, which is an indication that that law enforcement officers say can be an indication that someone's reaching for a weapon. And here we see Mr. Walker turn. And if you look closely, you can see the outline of Mr. Walker's body. He's turning, and he's also raising one of his arms. And these two slides depict that as well and show that Mr. Walker is raising his arms. So as Mr. Walker turns, at one particular point in time, he raises his arm out. At that point in time, he is shot by responding officers. The officers believed that Mr. Walker was a threat to them. They believed that he was a threat to themselves and other officers. As a result, he was shot. And again, this is just various angles of Mr. Walker with his hand out, arm extended. And from the lighting conditions, you're really unable to tell whether he had anything in his hand or not. So you can see here that an officer has drawn his weapon and he's pointing at Mr. Walker. Again, we see another angle of Mr. Walker with his arm out as shots continue. At this point, we see Mr. Walker has fallen to the ground or is about to fall to the ground. His arm is extended. One arm is extended up. Another arm is extended down. Various officers indicated in their statements that they heard a gunshot and they responded to the gunshot thinking that it was Mr. Walker who was shooting. It was not until later that it was discovered that Mr. Walker did not have a weapon on him. Mr. Walker gets shot, he falls to the ground, and he continues to get shot as he is on the ground. He rolls, but he doesn't stop moving. And we don't know whether he was moving as a result of being shot and his reaction to being shot, or some other reason, or whether he was trying to get up, but he was continuing to move. And he continued to be shot. Based on the time code calculations, the entire shooting, the time from the first gunshot to the last gunshot was approximately 6.7 seconds to 6.77 seconds. And this indicates the times that Mr. Walker rolled on his hips, rolled on his back, rolled on his stomach, and rolled on his hips and his stomach again. As you can see from this video, there were lots of shell casings left. There were about, as I stated before, there were 94 shots fired by all of the officers, and this is the scene processing that occurred. They were able to recover Mr. Walker's Buick. It slowly rolled into a building. I believe it was an apartment building, but not positive, but I believe it was an apartment building. On the seat of that vehicle were the gun, magazine, a wedding ring that Mr. Walker wore, and a shell casing. There was another shell casing recovered from the street from Route 8, South Ramp from East Talmadge. That's where the Officer Hartwell had on his dash cam viewed the initial shooting that caused the pursuit in the first place. So there was a shell casing there and also a shell casing inside Mr. Walker's vehicle. Should be noted that the shell casing inside of Mr. Walker's vehicle, the DNA analysis was done and it came back to Mr. Walker. The DNA, there was no DNA able to be analyzed off of the shell casing that was found on the ramp to the highway. But they both matched the being fired from that weapon that was recovered from Mr. Walker's vehicle. And this is again a close-up and documentation of the recovery. You can see in the left photo the wedding ring, the shell casing, as well as the DNA laboratory results that again will be published for you all to take a look at more closely. Again, that firearm was a Glock. It was traced back to the purchase that was made by Mr. Walker on June 20th at that Range USA location. Officers, shots fired by officer, I have written here anywhere between 3 shots fired by Officer 4 and 18 shots fired by the other officers. One officer fired 6 times, officer fired 16, one officer fired 4, one officer fired 11. Should be noted that even though officers reloaded, no officer reloaded and continued to discharge their weapon. Some officers discharged their weapon until they were empty. They reloaded it. However, they did not continue to fire. Additionally, I want to make clear that officers stopped firing. However, Mr. Walker continued to move. But in their interviews, the officers stated that the latter movements they did not see as a threat. However, they continued to shoot until they thought the threat was over. Play a quick animation. Included in your included in the information that is going to be released to during that is released on our website. It will be an animation of the officers and their positioning during the shooting. There was an autopsy done, obviously, on Mr. Walker. He was shot 46 times. He had 46 gunshot wounds to his body. That included entrance wounds that the coroner identified. There were no drugs or alcohol in his system. there was no alcohol or drugs in his system, and he suffered about 46 gunshot wounds. The coroner was not able to tell specifically because some of the entrance wounds and exit wounds could be confused with each other. But again, he had no alcohol or drugs in his system. And those are essentially the facts of the case relating to the death of Mr. Walker. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. We will now attempt to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, the first question is from Stephanie Warsmith with the Akron Beacon Journal.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
Stephanie, can you hear us?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I thought you were going to read it from the chat.
Oh, I can. I figured I'd give you the option.
No, that's okay. My question is whether there was any evidence that this was a suicide by cop incident.
We don't have any direct evidence, any direct, clear evidence that Mr. Walker had decided that he was going to do a suicide by cop. I don't want to speculate as to what Mr. Walker was thinking at the time, but I can say this, that it has been made public that Mr. Walker was going through a very tough time in his life. I think it's been documented that Mr. Walker's fiance had died a short time before this incident happened, and he was going through a very tough time, and he was hurting. And that night that he encountered the police, he was not acting himself. By all accounts, this was a good man, a good person, with no prior criminal record. So he was not acting himself. But other than that, I'm not willing to make a leap as to his intentions on that night.
The next question is from Jennifer Kahn with Spectrum News.
Yeah, I was kind of piggybacking off of Stephanie's question. I had been told that his text messages to family and friends did mention suicide. So none of the text records that we will see on your website make mention of that.
Well, you will see evidence included in the file from which you might draw conclusions, indirect evidence. Having reviewed it, I would hesitate to say conclusively that this was that was his motivation. Anthony, do you want to add anything?
I agree with that, General. There is some evidence that is in the file that people may draw their own conclusions based on Google searches and that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you.
The next question is from Doug Livingston with the Akron Beacon Journal.
I was wondering how we know without a doubt, words were without a doubt, that Walker was shooting at officers and not shooting in any other direction.
Well, first of all, I am going to take a slight exception, and I don't think anybody said he was shooting in the sense that there was an ongoing process of multiple shots. The officers reported seeing one muzzle flash. There were two casings recovered, one in the car, one out of the car. The muzzle flash that was observed occurred at a time when the police were pursuing him for a traffic violation. At that point, it was not a high velocity chase. They were simply, as one officer put it, chirping their siren at him at that point in time. So, where was he aiming? There is no conclusive evidence as to that. However, the shell casing was found in the same general location on the entrance ramp to State Route 8 that was reported by the officers as the muzzle shot. I think it's virtually certain that he was shooting the gun at them. He certainly was shooting during the time the police were trying to pull him over.
Okay, the next question is from Zachary Ryder with Rubber City Drones.
Hi, Mr. Yost. Zachary Ryder, Rubber City Drones. Are we certain that that bullet casing found on the Route 8 entrance ramp wasn't placed by the police themselves? As you mentioned, there was DNA found on the other parts of the gun and shell casing. We know from media standpoint that they had ample time to set this up.
Well, certainty is the luxury of theologians. We deal with the facts and the evidence that we have, and certainly no one saw the shell casing fall out of the driver's side window. However, I will point out that the ballistics did match the gun that Jayland Walker had only recently purchased. He was on video purchasing it. His DNA was on it. And I think it would strain credulity to make the assumption that that was somehow planted, not to mention which the logistics of allowing that to happen or causing that to happen. I don't even know how you would do that because BCI agents were quickly on the scene.
Okay, the next question is from Peggy Gallick with Fox 8 News.
Yes, thank you. What one piece of evidence more than any other led to this decision, do you believe?
I'll let Anthony answer to that, but I don't think you can point to a single piece of evidence. If that were the case, we wouldn't have needed to take more than a week to put everything in front of the grand jury.
Thank you, General. As the General stated, I don't believe that there is one piece of evidence that solves this or shows this or does anything. Usually in these types of cases, it's a culmination of evidence. All of the evidence from all the different parts of the investigation that come together. A lot of the evidence that officers and investigators don't know the night of their investigation, but come to light later during their extensive investigation. And I think due to the work of the BCI agents who worked their tails off in trying to uncover every rock and every stone to find the truth of the matter, they were able to pull together a complete, full investigation. And I believe that is what the grand jurors considered in making their decision.
What do you say to people who don't trust this process and see this decision and conclude, well, that's just the way it always goes? What would you say to them?
I would say to them to please go through the evidence themselves. We're putting everything out on the web, and that's the reason we're doing this. There needs to be confidence in the members of the community that this was independently investigated, that it was thorough, that it was expert. And I think if you go through the whole file that will be available to you, you will come to the same conclusion.
The next question is from Dan DeRoos with Channel 19 in Cleveland.
Good afternoon. Thanks for making yourselves available for questions today. I wonder if you could give us the split of the grand jury and their vote in the state of Ohio. Only 7 out of 9 jurors have to vote in favor of charges. Can you give us what the split was and potentially a split of the jury itself, males, females, race?
So we're prohibited by law from disclosing the vote. Anthony, do you want to talk about the composition? I actually wasn't in the room. I can't even answer the question.
Yes, I can answer that. There were 2 Black jurors, 3 men, and 6 women.
Okay, the next question is from Jess Kirsch with NBC Nightly.
Thank you very much all for giving us the time here. I just want to clarify a couple of things because I know a few different jurisdictions were mentioned. First of all, can you clarify all 8 officers who were having evidence against them reviewed? They were all Akron police officers. If you can please confirm that. Also, Can you confirm if any of the 8 police officers in question testified before the grand jury or submitted testimony written? Thank you.
Anthony?
Yes, they were all Akron police officers who were under consideration. I'm not at liberty to tell you what was included into the presentation of the grand jury.
Okay, and then just bouncing off of that, and maybe you can't answer this either, but I think, we hear the number of times shot, roughly 46. Obviously, we're talking about 8 different officers, but you are looking at multiple officers who fired close to 20 times, according to that slide you just showed us. Was, for you as prosecutors, was looking at the timeline in which those shots were fired at all a factor? By me doing a quick stopwatch, it looks like all the gunfire erupted in about a 7-second span. Is that the timeline you have? And is that something you emphasize when you're looking at this from an investigative standpoint?
Yes. The time from the first shot to the last shot was 6.7 seconds. Officers are able to use deadly force only when there's a threat of serious physical harm or deadly force against them. So each and every shot has to be accounted for. Each and every use of deadly force by a police officer has to be accounted for. So it is important and incumbent upon us to match up each reaction by a police officer to the response that they're attempting to stop.
Okay, the next question is from Doug Livingston with the Akron Beacon Journal.
I'm wondering on the capacity of the magazines, that all officers use the same weapon. How many bullets did each of their weapons hold before firing?
17 and 1 in the chamber, I believe, Anthony. Anybody didn't have the standard Glock?
That is correct. That's correct, Attorney General. All of the officers carry, I believe, the same make of gun, but not necessarily the same model of weapon. Some officers have smaller hands and things of that nature, so they may choose a smaller type of weapon that they carry. So they are different. I don't have the breakdown of how many rounds each officer was able to carry in their magazine. And officers do different things. It was some officers will chamber around and add another one to their magazine. Some officers won't do that to top off their magazine. So it kind of depends on the officers. And I know that answer was given, and the BCI agents who did their extensive investigation know that information, but I just don't know it off the top of my head right now.
Okay, the next question is from Christina Carrera with Capital B News.
Thank you for your time. I'm just curious to know the breakdown of the officers and the amount of bullets that were fired. Will we have the identity of those officers so we can figure out if there are previous excessive force accusations against those particular officers?
That's a question for the Akron Police Department and Police Chief.
Okay, and the next question is from Scott Knowles with News 5 in Cleveland.
I'm just wondering if the AG plans to release the names of the officers who fired in this incident, and if not, why not?
It's our policy not to name uncharged suspects. I would refer you to the Chief of Police for any further inquiry as to the identity.
One more quick one. Is there any indication that the Akron officers knew at the time of the pursuit on the 27th about the incident in New Franklin on the 26th?
Mr. Pearson, I'm going to let you address that so I don't get the timeline wrong.
Thank you. Yes, it's my understanding that some of the officers in the pursuit were able to link when they ran Mr. Walker's license plate. It spit back an information that pursuit had occurred the night before.
And do you know where in the whole process that occurred? Is it after the vehicle is stopped? Is it during the pursuit? Is it prior to the pursuit?
It's my understanding that it was fairly early on during the pursuit that they entered that information and got the response that Mr. Walker's vehicle, the 2005 Buick, was attempted to be pulled over the night before.
And do you believe that played a role in the continuation of the pursuit?
Let me answer this because there's an interesting nuance here that you'll find in the record on the web. The first car that encountered Jayland Walker called it in. The driver's partner was the one that used the mobile display terminal and found a note associated with that. They did not stop Jayland Walker at that moment. He was there. There were no warrants. There was no criminal record, and the note that was attached to that particular message in the mobile display terminal said that it had been a white driver. Mr. Pearson referred to that in his summary. They elected to let him go on without stopping him for the equipment violation, the broken taillight and the license plate light that were out. They've said that it was not safe for them or Mr. Walker or the general motoring public to stop for a minor infraction on a busy state route like 8. It was only about, as I recall, 10 minutes later or so that they, while still on routine patrol, saw the same car. Mr. Walker was driving through the exact same intersection, which meant that he had to get off the highway and come back to that same place. That was when the officers' curiosity was piqued, and they decided to investigate further. So the fact is that they did know and elected not to initially not even make the stop for safety, and because the original driver had been said to be a white man, and they could clearly see that Mr. Walker was African American.
So that was just for clarification, the same officer spots that car 2 different times that week.
The New Franklin officer was the previous night, and the Akron officers, the same 2 officers in that first car, saw him twice in short succession to each other the following night.
Okay, the next question is from WOIO News. The quick follow-up.
Yes, thank you very much for the follow-up. In the course of the grand jury testimony, did any of the 8 officers physically testify in front of the jury, or was this previously recorded testimony that was played? Were they ever physically there, or was it just video recorded testimony?
As Anthony said, we're not permitted to say who testified, so we can't answer the question.
And the last question of the day will go to Stephanie Warsmith with Akron Beacon Journal.
I'm wondering if there was any evidence that Jayland Walker had been involved in any crimes leading up to or before the shooting. We had heard that he might have been a suspect in some burglaries or robberies that occurred not long before this, and just wanted to ask about that.
Mr. Pearson, do you know anything about this?
Thank you, General. No, there's no indication that Mr. Walker was involved in any sort of nefarious activities before.
Thanks, everyone. We will go ahead and send release out. It will have a link to the files that will be online. And if there's any follow-up, please reach out to the communication office. We'll try to answer questions as best we can. Thank you.